I never thought a simple Sunday morning would change the way I saw my family. It started like any other day. Sunlight slipping through the curtains, the sound of birds outside, and the faint ticking of the old clock in the living room. I sat at the kitchen table with my cup of tea, watching the steam rise. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I used to love the sound of that silence. When my children were young, silence meant peace. But now it only reminded me of how empty the house had become. There was a time when this kitchen was the center of everything. Laughter, tiny feet running around, plates clattering, someone shouting, "Mom," from another room. I used to think I'd go crazy from all the noise. Now I'd give anything to hear it again. I remember when my eldest, Ravi, used to sit by the counter doing his homework while I cooked. He'd ask the most curious questions. "Mom, why do onions make people cry?" Or, "Do you think stars ever get lonely?" Back then, I never knew those small conversations would mean so much. And then there was Mira, my daughter, strong, independent, full of dreams. She'd always say she wanted to see the world, not just our small town. I was proud of her for that. Maybe I still am. But sometimes pride feels a lot like distance. I raised my children to be brave, to take care of themselves, to not depend on anyone, not even me. I thought that was what good mothers did. But somewhere along the way, I realized that in teaching them independence, I had also taught them how to live without me. The house felt too big now. Every room carried memories. Ravi's cricket bat still hanging near the door, Mira's old book stacked in the corner of her room, the photo of all of us laughing in the garden. They had moved out years ago, started their own lives, but somehow their presence still lingered in the walls. At first, they'd call every day, then every week, then once a month. Now, sometimes I just stare at my phone waiting for a message that doesn't come. I try not to take it personally. They're busy. They have jobs, families, responsibilities. I tell myself it's normal, that all parents go through this stage. But deep inside, there's a quiet ache that never leaves. People say loneliness comes when you're alone, but I learned that loneliness can live even when you're surrounded by memories. Last month, Ravi called. He sounded tired. I could hear his children playing in the background. He said, "Ma, we'll visit soon. Maybe next month." I smiled and said, "Don't worry, beta. Take your time." I meant it. Or at least I wanted to. After we hung up, I looked around the living room and whispered to myself, "Next month never really comes, does it?" It's strange how parents wait, not for money, not for gifts, but just for a few minutes of attention. A simple, "How are you, Ma?" can make the whole day feel brighter. Sometimes I wonder, did my mother feel the same way when I got busy with my own life? Did she ever sit by the window waiting for me to call? Maybe she did. Maybe this is how life teaches you, by making you stand in the same place where you once left someone else waiting. When Mira got married, I remember holding her hands just before she stepped out of the house. Her eyes were shining, half with excitement, half with fear. She said, "Ma, don't cry. I'll visit every weekend." I laughed and said, "I know you will." But of course, life had other plans. She moved to another city with her husband. They both work long hours. I don't blame them. Still, when she calls, I can feel the rush in her voice, like she's talking to me between meetings, between deadlines, between life itself. It's never the same as sitting together over tea. Sometimes I wonder when exactly it happened. The day my children stopped needing me. It didn't come all at once. It came in small ways. The first time Ravi said, "I already ate, Ma. Don't cook for me." The first time Mira said, "I'll handle it myself." The first time they both visited and spent more time on their phones than talking to me. Each moment felt small, harmless even, but together they built a wall of quiet distance between us. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just how life works. Children grow, parents step back. Still, late at night, when the house sleeps, my heart whispers, "Did I step back too far?" I've started to fill my days with little routines. I tend to the small garden outside, talk to the plants like they're old friends. Sometimes I bake something new and send pictures to Mira. She usually replies with a heart emoji. Ravi sometimes forgets to reply at all. It's okay. I've learned to find meaning in the smallest things: the smell of the earth after rain, the sound of the radio playing old songs, the taste of warm soup on lonely nights. But every once in a while, I still catch myself setting 3 plates on the dining table instead of 1. Old habits, I guess. When I tell people that I live alone, they often say, "Oh, that must be peaceful." And yes, sometimes it is. But peace can feel heavy when you didn't choose it. There's a kind of silence that comforts you, and then there's the kind that reminds you of what's missing. I've learned to smile through both. People often ask me, "Do you ever feel angry at your children for not visiting?" I always shake my head. How could I be angry? They're living the lives I prayed for. I wanted them to be happy, to have families of their own, to chase dreams I could never reach, and they are. That's what matters. But sometimes love means letting your heart ache quietly while watching your children walk away. Not because they don't love you, but because they finally have a life that doesn't depend on you anymore. I used to think motherhood was about doing everything for your children. Now I think it's about learning to let go, one day at a time. It's about being there even when they don't look back. It's about smiling through the pain of becoming invisible in the very lives you helped build. That realization didn't come suddenly. It grew over years of goodbyes, missed calls, and promises of next time. And yet, even now, when the phone rings and I hear their voices, my heart forgets everything. For those few minutes, I'm not lonely. I'm their mother again. Time moves quietly when you stop resisting it. The days grew longer, the light softer, and I began to enjoy the silence I once feared. There was no rush to check the phone in the morning, no ache when it didn't ring. Instead, there was a rhythm, simple, peaceful, mine. I'd wake up early, make tea, water the plants, and sit by the window watching the sun climb through the trees. Sometimes I'd hum an old song from my childhood. The house, once too quiet, began to hum with me, like it was breathing again. I started baking again too. Small things, nothing fancy. When the aroma of fresh bread filled the kitchen, it brought memories back. Ravi stealing the first piece before it cooled. Mira insisting I add more butter. I smiled at those memories now, not with longing, but with gratitude. How lucky I was to have loved so deeply that I missed it this much. Every Sunday, the reading club gathered at the park. We shared stories, not just from books, but from life. There was Mrs. D'Souza, who laughed louder than anyone and said, "My children call only when their Wi-Fi works." And Mr. Iqbal, who wrote poetry for a wife who had passed long ago. We all carried invisible stories, stitched together by years and silence. Yet sitting there under the trees, I realized something simple. I wasn't alone. We mothers, fathers, widows, we were all learning to live again, gently, without demanding much from the world. One morning, as I was arranging flowers on the table, my doorbell rang. It startled me. Visitors had become rare. When I opened the door, there they were, Ravi and Mira, both standing awkwardly like children again. Ravi held a small cake box, Mira a bouquet of white lilies. "Surprise, Ma," Mira said softly. For a second, I just stared at them, taking in the sight, the sound of their voices filling the house again. Then I smiled, not because I'd been waiting, but because they came anyway. They fussed over me, checking the kitchen, asking about my meals, teasing me for losing a little weight. I laughed and let them. Later, as we had tea together, Mira suddenly said, "You look different, Ma." Peaceful. I chuckled. Maybe I finally learned how to live with myself. Ravi looked at me seriously. "We've been terrible, haven't we?" I shook my head. "No, Beta, you've been living. That's not terrible." He lowered his eyes. "Still, we should have been here more often." For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then I reached out and held their hands. "You both gave me a life once. The chaos, the laughter, the noise. I wouldn't trade it for anything. But you don't have to feel guilty for moving forward. That's what I raised you for." That evening, they stayed longer than usual. We ate dinner together, talked about old times, and even watched one of Ravi's favorite childhood movies. The house was alive again, filled with laughter, the clatter of plates, the warmth of voices echoing through rooms that had forgotten them. As the night ended, Mira hugged me tightly. "We'll visit more often, Ma. I promise." I smiled, brushing her hair gently. Don't promise, Beta. Just come when your heart tells you to. Ravi kissed my forehead. Love you, Ma. I know, I whispered. And this time, when the door closed behind them, I didn't feel empty. I felt full. The days after their visit felt lighter. It wasn't that I expected them to return soon. It was that I no longer needed to. Love had shifted. Not gone, just grown quieter, older, wiser. It now lived in small moments. A message here, a photo there, a call filled with laughter. And in between those moments, I had myself. My garden, my books, my neighbors, my peace. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sunset, I realized this was enough. I didn't need the noise of the past to feel alive. I didn't need to be needed to feel loved. All those years, I thought motherhood ended when they stopped holding my hand. But now I knew it never really ends. It just changes shape, from sleepless nights to quiet prayers, from feeding them to blessing them, from being their world to watching them build their own. That's what love does. It lets go and still stays. Sometimes I still miss them. Of course I do. There are mornings when I catch myself setting an extra plate, or evenings when I hear a laugh and turn, thinking it's theirs. But now I smile at those moments. They're reminders that my love still lives, even in their absence. Last week, I received a small parcel in the mail. Inside was a framed photo of all of us, me, Ravi, Mera, from years ago at a picnic. On the back, Ravi had written, "For all the times we forgot to call, but never forgot to love." I held it for a long time, tracing the edges with my fingers. Tears filled my eyes, but they were not of sadness. They were of peace. Because now I understood I was never really forgotten. I was always there, quietly present in their hearts, even when life got loud. And so, tonight, as I sit here writing this last page, I feel a gentle warmth inside me. I think of the seasons that passed, the loneliness, the quiet lessons, the healing, and I whisper to myself, I did well. I loved well. The sky outside glows with soft starlight. Somewhere far away, my children are sleeping under the same sky. And I know, in the quiet rhythm of our hearts, we are still connected. Always have been, always will be. It was early spring when the turning point came. Not through a big tragedy or a stormy argument, but through something quiet, something ordinary. It started with a cold, just a little one, or so I thought. I felt weak that morning, dizzy when I stood up. My knees shook and I had to hold the edge of the table. I laughed it off at first. Old age, I said to myself. Just take it slow. But by afternoon, the fever had grown worse. My body ached, and even the simplest things, like reaching for a glass of water, felt heavy. I looked at my phone on the table. For a moment, I thought of calling Ravi or Mira, but I didn't. I didn't want to sound needy. They were busy. They had work, children, lives. I didn't want to be a burden. So I made myself some tea, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and sat by the window. The world outside moved as usual, children playing, neighbors chatting, birds returning to their nests. And I thought, even the sky doesn't stop when we're not well. By evening, my fever rose higher. My body trembled and I could barely stand. Finally, I gave in. I called Ravi. He didn't answer. So I called Mira. It rang several times before she picked up. Ma, I'm in a meeting. Can I call you back? Her voice was rushed, distracted. I swallowed and said softly, Of course, Beta. It's nothing. I just wanted to hear your voice. Oh, Ma, she sighed. I'll call after dinner, okay? And then she hung up. I stared at the screen, the call ended, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly alone. That night, my fever broke. But something else inside me did too. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disappointment. It was a quiet understanding, a realization that the time when I could call and be instantly heard was gone. I was no longer at the center of their lives. I was somewhere at the edges, still loved, still remembered, but not needed. The next morning, I woke up weak but calmer. I made some porridge and forced myself to eat. And then, for no reason I can explain, I started cleaning the house. I wiped every shelf, dusted every photo frame, folded old clothes. It was as if I was preparing the house for something. Or maybe preparing my heart to let go. While cleaning, I found an old envelope tucked between books. It was a letter. in Ravi's handwriting. The paper had yellowed slightly. I sat down and opened it. It was a letter he had written years ago when he first moved to the city for college. It said, "Ma, don't worry about me. I'll make you proud. I'll work hard. One day, I'll take care of you like you took care of me." I read it again and again. My eyes blurred with tears. He had kept that promise, in a way. He sent money on holidays, made sure I had what I needed, but I realized what I needed most wasn't money. It was presence. Later that week, the fever returned. The neighbor's son, the same little boy I often watched, noticed that I hadn't been outside for 2 days. He told his mother, and she came knocking. When she saw me pale and weak, she said, "You should have called someone." I smiled faintly and said, "Who would I call?" She helped me to the clinic. The doctor said it was a mild infection, nothing serious, but I needed rest and proper care. As I sat there, I thought, if that little boy hadn't noticed, how long would it have taken for anyone to realize? When I got home, I checked my phone again. Still no messages, no missed calls. I thought of calling Ravi again, but then I stopped. Something inside me whispered, "Stop chasing what doesn't return." So instead, I took out my diary again. I wrote everything, not out of sadness, but clarity. I wrote, "Today, I understood something. My children no longer need me. But maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what motherhood really is. Giving everything and asking for nothing in return." As I wrote, I felt a strange peace settle inside me. A few days later, Mira called. She sounded cheerful, as if nothing had happened. "Ma, I'm sorry I didn't call. Work's been crazy. How are you?" I smiled into the phone. "I'm okay now, beta. Just resting." "Oh, good. I was so worried," she said quickly. "Anyway, we're planning a little weekend trip. I'll call you when we're back." And just like that, she was gone again. This time, I didn't wait for the call. I didn't stare at the phone. I just carried on with my DE. Something had shifted. The pain was still there, but it didn't control me anymore. I began to accept that love doesn't always show up the way we expect. Sometimes it's silent, sometimes it forgets to call. But it's still there, buried under busyness, hidden behind life's noise. A week later, Ravi called unexpectedly. "Ma, sorry I've been so out of touch," he said. "Things have been hectic." I said softly, "That's all right, beta. I know how life can be." He hesitated. "You sure you're okay? You sound tired." For a second, I wanted to tell him everything. The fever, the clinic, the loneliness. But then I thought, what good would it do? He'd worry for a day and then forget again. So I said, "I'm fine, Ravi. Just getting old." He laughed lightly. "You're still stronger than me, Ma." We both smiled, and I felt the warmth return. Faint but real. After we hung up, I realized something profound. I couldn't change how often they called, but I could change how much I hurt when they didn't. The next morning, I made myself a promise. I would stop waiting, not out of pride, but out of peace. I would stop checking my phone every hour, stop counting the days between their calls, stop expecting them to fill the silence that was now mine to live with. Instead, I'd fill it myself with small joys, quiet hobbies, little acts of love that didn't depend on anyone else. I started reading again. I began writing small notes of gratitude every night, for the sunrise, for the flowers in the garden, for the sound of laughter from the neighbor's child. One evening, I even joined a local reading club. The people there were kind, warm, full of stories. Some were widows, some lived alone like me. We shared tea and memories, and I realized I wasn't the only one feeling forgotten. There were so many mothers like me, all carrying the same silent ache behind gentle smiles. That night, as I walked home, the streetlights flickering softly, I thought, maybe being forgotten doesn't mean being unloved. Maybe it just means the world has turned and it's our turn to step back, watch and bless quietly. A few weeks later, Ravi and Mira finally called together. They sounded cheerful, asking about my health, my food, my garden. They said they'd visit soon. I listened, smiled and said, "I'd love that." When the call ended, I didn't cry. I just sat there, feeling the quiet around me. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was acceptance, the kind that doesn't come from giving up, but from finally understanding what love really means. That night, I stood by the window again. the same window where I had once waited for their calls. The moonlight fell softly across the floor, and I whispered to myself, I think I'm finally okay. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small in their absence. I felt whole in my own presence. It was early winter when I began to notice how much things had changed. The evenings grew colder, and so did the phone calls. Ravi used to call every Sunday without fail. We would talk for an hour about work, the children, even the little things like his wife's new recipes or the neighbor's noisy dog. But lately those calls became shorter. Ma, I'll call you later, he'd say. Just a bit busy today. And sometimes, later never came. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I told myself he was tired, that life was simply keeping him busy. But there was something in his tone. Polite, hurried, distant, like he was talking to someone he cared for, but didn't quite know how to connect with anymore. I'd hang up, stare at the empty chair across from me and think, when did our conversations become so careful? One afternoon, I decided to surprise him. It had been months since I'd seen my grandchildren, and I missed them terribly. So I packed some sweets, a few toys, and took the morning train to the city. The journey was long, but my heart was light. I kept imagining their faces when they'd see me, how they'd run into my arms like before. But when I reached his apartment and rang the doorbell, things didn't go as I imagined. Ravi opened the door, surprised. Ma, you should have called. We weren't expecting you. I smiled and said softly, I wanted to surprise you. He looked uncomfortable, glancing back into the house. Inside, his wife stood near the sofa, holding their youngest. The older one was sitting on the floor with a tablet. No one looked excited. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then his wife said, Please come in, Ma. Her smile was polite, the kind you give a guest, not family. I placed the sweets on the table. Ravi poured me some tea, though I could tell he was in a rush. The children said hello, then went back to their games. No hugs, no laughter. I tried to start a conversation, asked about school, about their plans, about how work was going. They answered, but their minds were elsewhere. After a while, his wife excused herself to take a call. Ravi's phone buzzed, and he looked at it every few minutes. The warmth I had carried from home slowly faded. The tea grew cold before I could finish it. When it was time to leave, Ravi offered to call me a cab. I said I could take the bus. He nodded, relieved. At the door, I hugged him and whispered, Take care, Beta. He hugged me back briefly and said, Of course, Ma. We'll visit soon. As I walked away, I turned once, hoping to see them wave, but the door had already closed. On the bus ride home, I stared out the window. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and blue. I thought about how, when he was small, Ravi used to hold my hand so tightly while crossing the road. Now he barely held my gaze. A strange thought crossed my mind. Maybe this is how life prepares you to say goodbye, slowly, piece by piece. When I reached home, the house looked emptier than before. The clock ticked louder. The air felt still. I placed the uneaten sweets on the table and sat down, letting the quiet wrap around me. For the first time, I didn't cry. I just sat there, still, heavy, silent, trying to accept what my heart already knew. Days passed, then weeks. Mira called one evening. Her voice was cheerful, but there was distance there too. Ma, we're thinking of taking a short vacation abroad, she said. Maybe you can come next time? I smiled. That sounds lovely, Mira. You should go. Enjoy yourselves. She paused, maybe expecting me to sound sad. But I wasn't sad, just tired of waiting, of hoping, of pretending that things would go back to how they were. Before hanging up, she said, Don't stay up too late, okay? I laughed gently. Who do I stay up for now, child? She chuckled, not realizing the truth behind my words. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all the moments I had been needed. When they had fevers, when they needed money for college, when they cried over heartbreaks, when they called for recipes or advice. Now, they didn't need any of that. They had everything they once asked for. Jobs, homes, love, children, everything except time for me. And yet I couldn't bring myself to be angry, because I had raised them to have exactly this life. A life where they could stand without me. It was the dream I had, and also the silence I lived with. A few days later, it was my birthday. I didn't tell anyone. I baked myself a small cake, just enough for one. Around noon, Mira called. "Happy birthday, Ma," she said quickly. "I'm so sorry, I can't talk long." "We're heading out," I said. "That's all right, Beta." "Thank you." Ravi texted later that evening, just one line. "Happy birthday, Ma. Hope you had a good day." I smiled at the screen, typed a simple thank you, and set the phone down. The message was short, but it still warmed my heart. Because even in their distance, there was still a small spark of love. Sometimes that's all we get, small sparks, and somehow we learn to survive on them. That night, the power went out. The house was dark except for the candlelight flickering on the table. I sat there, watching the flame dance, listening to the wind outside. And then a strange thought crossed my mind. What would happen if one day I didn't pick up the phone? Would they notice? Would they call again? The thought scared me. Not because I doubted their love, but because I knew how easy it was for life to move on without us. We parents spend our lives building a world for our children. And when they finally find their own world, ours becomes a quiet memory. The next morning, I found an old photo album. It was filled with pictures, birthdays, school plays, family trips. In every picture, there was laughter, closeness, warmth. And then I realized that was my time. My season of being needed, being loved, being the center. Now that season had passed. But even as the tears fell, I also smiled. Because no one can take those years away. They were real. They were mine. A week later, I got a call from a neighbor. She asked if I could help take care of her little boy while she ran errands. I said yes immediately. The boy was about 5, full of energy and curiosity. He ran around my living room, asking endless questions, the kind Ravi once asked me. "Why is the sky blue? Do you think clouds get tired?" I laughed for the first time in weeks. When his mother came to pick him up, she thanked me, saying, "He really likes you. You remind him of his grandmother." After they left, I stood by the window, watching them walk away. And I thought, maybe life takes away certain roles from us, only to give them back in new forms. Maybe I wasn't done being needed. Maybe I just needed to find where I still mattered. That night, I took out my old diary, the one I hadn't touched in years. I started writing again, not to complain, not to regret, just to remember. I wrote about the laughter, the late-night talks, the first day Ravi went to school, the time Mira fell and I kissed her scraped knee. Page after page, I filled it with love. By the time I finished, I realized something. I had been so focused on what I lost that I forgot to see what I still had. Love doesn't end when children grow up, it just changes its shape. Maybe they don't call as often, maybe they forget at birthdays, maybe they don't visit as much. But somewhere, I know, when they sit quietly at night, a memory of me still flickers in their hearts.